The paper trembled in my hands as I read the warrant for the third time. Judge Morrison's signature looked wrong. The case number did not match county format. The date was from last Tuesday, but Corinne claimed she got it this morning. 4 deputies stood on my porch, hands resting on their weapons, waiting for my response. Corinne smiled, that cold smile I had learned to hate over the past 6 months. She thought she had me cornered. She thought a fake piece of paper would be enough to break a man who survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless classified missions she could never imagine. She was about to learn why you never corner a Delta Force operator, even a retired one. The morning coffee tasted perfect on my back porch that Tuesday in March. Steam rose from the mug as I watched the sun climb over the rolling hills of Cedar County. After 22 years in the Army, with the last 8 in Delta Force, this simple ritual felt like the greatest luxury in the world. No mission briefs, no enemy positions to study, no brothers-in-arms depending on my next decision for their lives. I had bought this 40-acre property 2 years earlier when my retirement became official. The realtor called it a fixer-upper. I called it peace. The old farmhouse needed work, but my hands stayed busy with honest labor instead of the specialized skills that once made me valuable to my country. Most neighbors knew I was former military, but I kept the details vague. Delta Force operators learn early that anonymity is survival. The town of Cedar Ridge had 1,200 residents, 1 main street, and the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's business. I preferred it that way after decades of classified missions in places that officially did not exist. Here, my biggest decision was whether to plant tomatoes or peppers in the back garden. That changed the first time I met Sheriff Corinne Mitchell. I was driving back from the hardware store when she pulled me over for allegedly speeding through the school zone. The speed limit sign clearly read 25 miles per hour. My speedometer showed 22 when she hit her lights. But Corinne stood beside my truck window with that particular brand of small-town authority that had obviously gone to her head. License and registration, she demanded without introduction or explanation. Her uniform was pressed sharp, badge polished bright, and her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to stretch her face into a permanent scowl. Everything about her screamed control and intimidation. "May I ask what the violation was, officer?" I asked politely. "Sheriff," she corrected with ice in her voice, "and I will ask the questions here." I handed over my documents and waited while she took an unusually long time checking them in her patrol car. When she returned, her expression had shifted from routine traffic stop to something more calculating. "Says here you are retired military," she said, studying my license. "What kind of military?" "Army," I replied simply. "What did you do in the Army?" That question crossed the line from traffic stop into fishing expedition, but I kept my voice calm and respectful. "Various assignments, Sheriff. Nothing that affects my driving record." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly frustrated that I was not providing the submissive response she expected. Finally, she handed back my documents without issuing a citation. "Drive more carefully, Mr. Hayes," she said. "We take traffic safety seriously in Cedar Ridge." I watched her walk back to her patrol car, noting how she moved like someone who enjoyed the power more than the responsibility. 22 years of reading people in high-stakes situations had taught me to recognize danger in all its forms. Sheriff Corinne Mitchell was definitely dangerous, just not in any way I had encountered before. That night, my neighbor Tom Peterson stopped by with a six-pack and a warning. "Saw Corinne pull you over today," he said as we sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "She has been getting worse lately, power going to her head." "How so?" Tom took a long drink before answering. Started about a year ago when the old sheriff retired. Karen got promoted from deputy to sheriff, and something changed. She goes after people now. Looks for reasons to hassle folks, especially anyone she thinks might challenge her authority. Anyone file complaints? Who are you going to complain to? Her department. The mayor who appointed her. Tom shook his head. This is a small town, friend. Karen has connections and she holds grudges. I thanked Tom for the warning, but honestly did not think much of it at the time. I had dealt with bigger threats than one small-town sheriff with an attitude problem. Besides, I planned to keep my head down, work on my property, and avoid unnecessary conflict. That plan lasted exactly 3 weeks. The sound of gravel crunching under tires woke me at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. Through my bedroom window, I watched 3 patrol cars pull into my driveway like they were responding to an armed robbery. Karen stepped out of the lead vehicle, adjusting her duty belt with theatrical authority, while 2 nervous-looking deputies flanked her on either side. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, took a deep breath, and walked out to meet them on my front porch. The mountain air was crisp, birds were singing in the oak trees, and absolutely nothing about this peaceful morning justified 3 police cars on my property. "Good morning, Sheriff," I said calmly. "What can I do for you?" Karen stopped about 10 feet from my porch steps, close enough to establish dominance but far enough to maintain tactical distance. Her sunglasses reflected the morning sun, and her hand rested casually near her weapon. "We received a noise complaint about this property," she announced loudly. "Multiple reports of loud music and disturbances late at night." I glanced at my nearest neighbor's house, clearly visible a quarter-mile across the pasture, then back at Karen. "I was asleep by 9 o'clock last night, Sheriff. No music, no disturbance." "The complaint was filed yesterday morning," she replied with a smirk. "Are you saying the caller lied?" "I am saying there was no loud music or disturbance from this property." One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that this was harassment rather than legitimate police work. But Karen was just getting started. "I need to search the premises for evidence of the disturbance," she declared. "Speakers, sound equipment, anything that might explain the complaints." "Do you have a warrant for that search, Sheriff?" Her face flushed slightly at the question. "I do not need a warrant for a noise violation investigation." "Actually, you do need a warrant to search inside my home," I replied politely but firmly. "You are welcome to observe anything visible from public areas, but I do not consent to any search of my property or residence." The tension shifted immediately. Karen had expected compliance, maybe even gratitude for her restraint in not arresting me immediately. Instead, she faced someone who knew his rights and was calm enough to exercise them. "Are you refusing to cooperate with a police investigation?" she demanded. "I am exercising my Fourth Amendment rights while cooperating fully with any lawful investigation," I replied. "If you have specific questions about noise complaints, I am happy to answer them." "Where were you last night between 10 and midnight?" "Asleep in my bed." "Can anyone verify that?" "Can anyone verify that you received legitimate noise complaints?" The second question clearly caught her off guard. Her jaw tightened, and she took a step closer to the porch. "I do not appreciate your attitude, Mr. Hayes." "I appreciate your service to this community, Sheriff, but I also have rights as a citizen." We stared at each other for a long moment. Karen was obviously frustrated that her standard intimidation tactics were not working. I was beginning to understand that this was not about noise complaints at all. "We will be watching this property closely," she finally said. "Any further complaints and we will be back." "I understand, Sheriff." She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "What kind of work did you do in the Army, Mr. Hayes?" "Various assignments." "Combat." "Some." Her eyes narrowed behind those sunglasses. "Well, this is not a combat zone, soldier. This is my jurisdiction, and we do things my way here." After they left, I called the sheriff's department to file my own complaint about harassment. The desk clerk took my information politely but without enthusiasm. Then I called Tom Peterson. "Karen filed that noise complaint herself," he told me an hour later. "My wife works dispatch part-time. The call came from a number registered to Karen's personal cell phone, but she used a fake name." That was when I realized this was not going to end with a simple misunderstanding. Sheriff Karen Mitchell had declared war on me, and she was willing to break the law to win it. The problem for Karen was that she had no idea who she was fighting. Over the next 6 weeks, Karen's patrol car became as common on my road as the mail truck. Every few days brought a new excuse for her to harass me, each one more transparent than the last. First came the property violations. Karen arrived with a clipboard and measuring tape, claiming someone had reported my fence might exceed county height restrictions. She spent an hour measuring every section while I watched from my porch, knowing full well that my fence was 6 inches shorter than the maximum allowed height. "Looks like you are in compliance," she admitted grudgingly. "This time." The next week brought a surprise vehicle inspection. Karen pulled me over 3 blocks from my house, claiming my truck looked like it might have a broken tail light. She spent 20 minutes examining every inch of my vehicle before admitting that all lights were functioning properly. "Just being thorough," she said with that cold smile. "Cannot be too careful with vehicle safety." The harassment campaign expanded beyond direct confrontation. My neighbors started mentioning visits from Sheriff Karen, asking detailed questions about my activities, my visitors, and my daily routines. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who lived closest to my property, knocked on my door one evening looking nervous and apologetic. "I am sorry to bother you, dear," she said, "but Sheriff Karen stopped by yesterday asking about your comings and goings. She wanted to know if you have visitors, what kind of vehicles they drive, whether you work unusual hours." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you are the quietest, most respectful neighbor I have had in 30 years, but she seemed disappointed by that answer." The psychological warfare was textbook harassment, designed to isolate me from the community and create an atmosphere where everyone expected trouble. Karen was essentially conducting a surveillance operation on a law-abiding citizen, using her badge to justify what would otherwise be stalking. But the real escalation came when she started targeting my truck. Over 2 weeks, Karen pulled me over 6 times for alleged traffic violations. Failure to signal when no other vehicles were present, following too closely behind a car that was actually following too closely behind me, suspicious driving patterns that consisted of me driving to the hardware store and back home. Each stop followed the same pattern. Karen would take an unusually long time checking my license and registration, clearly hopping to find something that would justify a search or an arrest. She would ask probing questions about where I was going, where I had been, and why I needed to make so many trips to town. "You seem to drive around a lot for a retired person," she observed during the 4th stop. "I am working on my property. That requires supplies." "What kind of work requires so many trips to the hardware store?" "The kind that involves fixing things that are broken." Her frustration was becoming more obvious with each encounter. Whatever she hoped to accomplish with this harassment campaign was not working, and her tactics were escalating accordingly. The breaking point came when she started involving other people. Tom Peterson called me one evening sounding worried. "Corinne came by the house today asking about you. She wanted to know if I had ever seen weapons on your property, whether you had ever seemed unstable or angry, if I thought you might be a threat to the community." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were the most level-headed person I had met in years, and that her questions were completely inappropriate. But she kept pushing, asking if I would call her if I ever felt unsafe around you." Similar visits went to every neighbor within a mile of my property. Corinne was conducting what military intelligence would call a hostile assessment, gathering information to build a case for some future action against me. The pattern was clear. She had decided I was a problem that needed to be eliminated from her jurisdiction, but she had not yet found a legal way to accomplish that goal. The harassment was designed to either force me to leave town voluntarily or provoke me into doing something she could arrest me for. Neither option was going to happen. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and made a decision that would change everything. Corinne wanted to play games with someone she thought was just another intimidated citizen. She was about to discover that 22 years of Army training, including 8 years in the most elite special operations unit in the world, had taught me a few things about psychological warfare myself. The difference was that my training had been legal and ethical. Corinne was about to learn the hard way what happens when corruption meets competence. Thursday morning arrived gray and humid, with storm clouds building over the mountains. I was replacing fence posts when the convoy appeared. 4 patrol cars this time, plus Corinne's personal vehicle. She had brought backup for whatever she was planning. Corinne stepped out wearing full tactical gear, including a bulletproof vest that seemed designed more for intimidation than actual protection. The 4 deputies looked uncomfortable, clearly aware that this was not a normal law enforcement operation. "Mr. Hayes," Corinne called out as she approached, "I have a warrant to search these premises." She held up a folded document with theatrical authority, waving it like a weapon, but something about her body language immediately triggered my training. In Delta Force, we learned to read micro-expressions, voice stress, and behavioral tells that indicated deception under pressure. Corinne was exhibiting all of them. "May I see the warrant, Sheriff?" "You can see it after we secure the area," she replied, but her voice carried a slight tremor that had not been there before. "I would like to examine the warrant before any search begins," I said calmly. "That is my right under the Fourth Amendment." Corinne's jaw tightened. She had clearly hoped to rush through this process before I could ask inconvenient questions. Reluctantly, she handed over the document. The moment I unfolded it, I knew it was fake. 22 years of military service had exposed me to thousands of legal documents. Search warrants have a specific format, required language, and proper judicial signatures. This document had none of those things. The judge's signature was wrong. I had seen Judge Morrison's signature on legitimate court documents, and this was not even close. The case number format did not match Cedar County standards. The probable cause statement was too vague and relied on hearsay that would never pass judicial review. Most damning of all, the date showed the warrant had been issued last Tuesday, but Corinne claimed she had received it this morning. No judge issues search warrants and then holds them for 5 days before execution. "This warrant appears to have irregularities," I said carefully. "What kind of irregularities?" Corinne demanded, but her face was already flushing with anger. The signature does not match Judge Morrison's known handwriting. The case number format is incorrect for this county. The probable cause statement lacks specificity required by law. Are you questioning the legitimacy of a court-issued warrant? I am exercising my right to examine any warrant before consenting to a search of my property. The four deputies exchanged glances. They knew something was wrong, but Karen was their superior officer, and they were caught between following orders and following the law. You are obstructing a legitimate police investigation, Karen said, her voice rising. I am asking to verify the authenticity of a legal document before allowing a search of my home. Are you some kind of lawyer now? No, ma'am, but I am a citizen with constitutional rights. Karen took a step closer, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. I do not care what you think you know about the law. I have a warrant, and I am going to execute it. That was the moment I realized Karen had crossed the line from harassment into criminal behavior. Filing a false police report was one thing. Fabricating a search warrant was felony corruption that could destroy her career and send her to prison. It was also the moment I decided to reveal information I had kept hidden for 2 years. Sheriff Mitchell, I said quietly, before this situation escalates further, I think you should know that I spent 8 years in Delta Force. My job involved analyzing documents, recognizing forgeries, and identifying threats to national security. This warrant is fake, and continuing with this search would constitute criminal behavior under federal law. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stared at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. Delta Force was not something most people encountered in civilian life. The reputation alone was enough to give most people pause. One of the deputies whispered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Karen's face went through several color changes before settling on a dangerous shade of red. I do not care if you were a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret or whatever you think you were. This is my jurisdiction, and I have a warrant. Ma'am, with respect, Delta Force operators are Army, not Navy, and this warrant is fabricated. I suspect if we call Judge Morrison right now, he will confirm that he never signed this document. Karen's hand moved closer to her weapon. You are threatening a police officer. No, ma'am. I am identifying criminal behavior and suggesting we resolve this situation before it becomes a federal case. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour. 4 deputies watched their sheriff consider whether to arrest a decorated veteran for refusing to comply with a fake warrant. Karen realized she had pushed too far, too fast, against someone who was not going to be intimidated. Finally, she folded the warrant and stepped back. "We will be back," she said, trying to salvage some authority from the situation. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, "but next time please bring a real warrant." After they left, I stood in my driveway holding the fence post I had been installing when this all started. Karen had just committed multiple felonies in front of 4 witnesses. She had also learned something about me that was going to change the entire dynamic of our conflict. I was not just another retired soldier she could push around. I was someone with the training, knowledge, and experience to fight back effectively. The war between us was about to become very real. That night, I did what any good soldier does after enemy contact. I conducted an after-action review and began planning my counterattack. The kitchen table became my operations center. I spread out every document, photograph, and piece of evidence I had collected over the past 2 months of harassment. Police reports, incident numbers, witness statements, and now a fabricated search warrant that would be the smoking gun in any corruption investigation. Delta Force had taught me that successful operations require three things: intelligence, planning, and precise execution. Karen had been conducting psychological warfare against me, but she had made the same mistake many enemies make. She underestimated her opponent and left evidence of her crimes. My first priority was documenting everything. I photographed the fake warrant from multiple angles, showing the forged signature, incorrect formatting, and impossible timeline. Each harassment incident got its own file with dates, times, witnesses, and Karen's stated justifications that were obviously pretextual. The pattern was clear. Karen had been systematically violating my constitutional rights for months, using her badge to conduct what amounted to a personal vendetta. Any one of these incidents might be explained away as misunderstanding or poor judgment. Together, they painted a picture of deliberate criminal behavior. But documentation was only the first step. I needed to understand Karen's vulnerabilities and the systemic weaknesses that allowed her to operate with impunity. I spent 3 days researching Karen's background and discovering that I was not her first victim. Public records showed a pattern of complaints against her going back to her days as a deputy. Citizens had filed reports about excessive force, illegal searches, and harassment, but none of those complaints had resulted in discipline or investigation. The reason became clear when I researched the oversight structure. Karen reported to a city council that met once a month and rarely questioned police operations. Internal affairs consisted of Karen investigating herself. The county sheriff was elected, but had no authority over municipal police departments. Karen had built herself a perfect little kingdom where she could abuse power without consequences. Until now. My military experience had taught me that every enemy has weaknesses, and every system has pressure points. Karen's weakness was her arrogance and her willingness to break the law. The system's weakness was the lack of external oversight. Both of those weaknesses could be exploited. I began reaching out to other victims, starting with neighbors who had mentioned Karen's harassment during casual conversations. Tom Peterson introduced me to 3 other residents who had been targeted by Karen for various invented violations. Sarah Williams, a single mother who worked 2 jobs, had been pulled over 8 times in 6 months for alleged traffic violations that never resulted in citations. She seems to enjoy the power trip, Sarah told me, making me late for work, scaring my kids when they see police cars following us home. Mike Rodriguez, who owned the town's only Mexican restaurant, had been subjected to weekly visits from Karen, claiming anonymous reports of health code violations. She never finds anything wrong, he said, but she makes sure my customers see police cars in my parking lot during dinner rush. The pattern was always the same. Karen targeted people who were different, isolated, or unlikely to fight back effectively. She used her badge to conduct personal vendettas while hiding behind the pretense of law enforcement. But she had made a critical error in targeting me. Unlike her other victims, I had the training, resources, and motivation to fight back systematically. My plan began taking shape over several long nights of careful consideration. It would require patience, precision, and absolute adherence to legal and ethical standards. Karen was using corruption to abuse her power. I would use legitimate channels to expose that corruption and ensure she faced appropriate consequences. The first phase would involve formal complaints through every available channel: state police, FBI, district attorney's office, and civilian oversight boards. Each complaint would be meticulously documented with evidence and witness testimony. The second phase would expose Karen's pattern of behavior to public scrutiny through media attention and community organizing. Sunlight was the best disinfectant for corruption. The final phase would be criminal prosecution and civil litigation to ensure Karen faced personal consequences for her actions and that the system was reformed to prevent future abuses. It was a comprehensive campaign designed to achieve total victory through legitimate means. Karen had started this fight using illegal tactics and abuse of power. I was going to finish it using the Constitution and the rule of law. She was about to learn why you never pick a fight with someone who has more training, more patience, and more commitment to justice than you do. Monday morning, I launched a coordinated assault on Karen's corrupt empire using every legitimate weapon in the American justice system. The first salvo went to the FBI field office in Denver. I hand-delivered a comprehensive complaint documenting Karen's pattern of civil rights violations, including the fabricated search warrant that constituted federal crimes under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. The federal agent who accepted my complaint read through the evidence with growing interest. "This is extensive documentation," Agent Sarah Chen observed. "How long have you been collecting this information?" 2 months of active documentation, ma'am. But the pattern goes back at least a year based on other victims I have interviewed. Other victims? I provided contact information for 6 residents who had agreed to cooperate with any federal investigation. Each had experienced similar harassment campaigns, and together they painted a picture of systematic corruption that could not be dismissed as isolated incidents. The same day, I filed complaints with the Colorado State Police Internal Affairs Division, the District Attorney's Office, and the State Attorney General's Office. Each complaint was identical in its core facts, but tailored to the specific jurisdiction and legal authority of each office. By Tuesday, I had requested every document related to Karen's employment through the Colorado Open Records Act. Personnel files, complaint histories, training records, and disciplinary actions. Government transparency laws would force the city to either produce evidence of Karen's misconduct or admit they had failed to properly investigate citizen complaints. Wednesday brought the media phase of my campaign. I contacted Sarah Martinez, an investigative reporter for the Denver Post who specialized in police misconduct stories. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in the county seat, away from Karen's immediate sphere of influence. "This is remarkable documentation," Sarah said as she reviewed my evidence. "Most police misconduct cases rely on he said, she said testimony. You have photographs, witness statements, and what appears to be a fabricated legal document." "The fake warrant is the key," I explained. "Everything else could potentially be explained as poor judgment or misunderstanding. But fabricating a search warrant is an unambiguous felony that demonstrates criminal intent." Sarah's article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "Small Town Sheriff Accused of Civil Rights Violations, Document Forgery." The story included interviews with multiple victims, analysis of the fake warrant by legal experts, and Karen's refusal to comment on specific allegations. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, the mayor's office had received over 200 phone calls demanding Karen's suspension pending investigation. The city council scheduled an emergency meeting for Wednesday evening. 3 more victims called me offering to share their own experiences with Karen's harassment. But Karen's response was swift and desperate. Tuesday afternoon, She showed up at my property again, this time alone and clearly agitated. I watched her park and walk toward my porch with the deliberate stride of someone who had run out of patience with subtle approaches. "You son of a bitch," she said without preamble. "You think you can destroy my career with your lies and your fancy military connections. I think I can expose criminal behavior using legitimate legal channels," I replied calmly. "Criminal behavior. I am trying to protect this community from people like you, outsiders who come here thinking they can do whatever they want. People like me. Military types who think their service gives them special privileges. You are not special, Hayes. You are just another citizen in my jurisdiction." I stood up from my porch chair and looked directly at her. "You are absolutely right, Sheriff. I am just another citizen, which means I have the same constitutional rights as every other citizen, and you have the same legal obligation to respect those rights." Her face flushed with rage. "I could arrest you right now for obstruction of justice, for filing legitimate complaints about police misconduct. That would be retaliation, which is another federal crime. You think you are so smart with your legal talk and your federal contacts. I think corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight. That is why I documented everything and shared it with appropriate authorities." Karen stared at me for a long moment, clearly struggling between her desire to escalate the confrontation and her growing awareness that every action she took was being watched and recorded. "This is not over," she finally said. "No, ma'am, it is not, but it will end with you facing appropriate consequences for your actions." After she left, I called Agent Chen to report the attempted intimidation. Retaliation against federal complainants was a serious crime that would add another layer to Karen's legal problems. That evening, Tom Peterson stopped by with news from town. "Word is that Karen's been suspended pending investigation," he said. "Mayor's trying to get ahead of the story before it gets worse." "How is the community responding?" "Mixed. Some folks think you are causing unnecessary trouble, but a lot of people are finally talking about problems they have had with Karen for months. Seems like you gave them permission to speak up." The counterattack was working exactly as planned. Karen's corruption was being exposed through legitimate channels. Her victims were finding their voices, and the system was finally responding to citizen complaints. But I knew Karen was not going to go quietly. Cornered enemies are always the most dangerous. The Cedar Ridge Civic Center had never seen a crowd like the one that packed into the emergency town hall meeting on Wednesday evening. Over 300 residents filled every seat, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The tension was electric as Mayor Patricia Collins called the meeting to order. Karen sat alone at a table facing the crowd, wearing her dress uniform and the expression of someone who believed she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. Her lawyer, a nervous-looking man from the county seat, kept whispering urgent advice that she seemed determined to ignore. Mayor Collins opened with a brief statement about the ongoing investigation, but the crowd was not interested in political speeches. They wanted answers. "We are here tonight to address concerns about police conduct in our community," the mayor said. "This is an opportunity for citizens to speak directly about their experiences." Sarah Williams was the first to approach the microphone. Her voice shook slightly as she began, but gained strength as she continued. "6 months ago, I was a single mother trying to raise 2 kids and work 2 jobs without causing trouble for anyone. Then Sheriff Mitchell decided I was speeding through school zones that I never even drove through. 8 traffic stops in 6 months. 8 times my children watched police cars follow us home. 8 times I was late for work because the sheriff wanted to flex her authority. The crowd murmured with recognition. Sarah's experience was not unique. Mike Rodriguez spoke next, describing months of harassment disguised as health inspections. Every week, she found new excuses to park police cars in my restaurant parking lot during dinner rush. My customers started going elsewhere because they thought something was wrong. She was destroying my business to satisfy some personal grudge. One by one, victims found their voices. An elderly veteran who had been cited for parking violations in front of his own house. A young couple who had been subjected to repeated noise complaint investigations for the crime of having a backyard barbecue. A teenager who had been pulled over 4 times in 2 weeks for allegedly looking suspicious while driving to his part-time job. The pattern was unmistakable. Karen had been conducting a reign of terror against anyone who caught her attention or failed to show sufficient deference to her authority. When my turn came, I approached the microphone carrying the fabricated search warrant. "My name is Michael Hayes," I began. "I moved to Cedar Ridge 2 years ago looking for peace after 22 years of military service. Instead, I found myself targeted by a sheriff who believed that badge gave her the right to ignore the Constitution." I held up the fake warrant. This document represents the culmination of months of harassment. Sheriff Mitchell fabricated a search warrant, complete with a forged judge's signature, in an attempt to illegally search my property. This is not poor judgment or overzealous law enforcement. This is criminal behavior. The crowd erupted in angry voices. Several people shouted questions at Karen, demanding explanations for her actions. Karen finally stood to address the crowd, her face flushed with anger and defiance. "I have served this community faithfully for 12 years, she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "Everything I have done has been in the interest of public safety and law enforcement. If some people do not like being held accountable for their actions, that is not my problem." "What about the fake warrant?" someone shouted from the back. "That warrant was prepared in good faith based on legitimate law enforcement concerns," Karen replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then why did you forge Judge Morrison's signature?" I asked calmly. Karen's lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering urgently, but she shook him off. "I did not forge anything," she said. "Any discrepancies in that document are clerical errors, not criminal acts." Judge Morrison himself stood up from the third row. "Sheriff Mitchell, I never signed any warrant for a search of Mr. Hayes' property. I never even saw such a request. That signature is not mine, and I am prepared to testify to that fact in court." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen had just been publicly contradicted by the judge whose signature she had allegedly forged. Her lawyer was frantically making notes and looking like he wanted to disappear. Karen herself seemed to realize that she had just confessed to document forgery in front of 300 witnesses. Mayor Collins called for order, but the crowd was beyond control. Shouts of "resign" and "arrest her" filled the air. Several county commissioners who had been sitting quietly in the front row were having urgent whispered conversations. The public reckoning was complete. Karen's corruption had been exposed, her victims had found their voices, and the community had witnessed her downfall in real time. Justice was no longer a question of if, but when. 3 weeks after the town hall meeting, I was working in my garden when Tom Peterson jogged up my driveway with a huge grin on his face. "It is over," he announced breathlessly. "Karen just got arrested." I set down my shovel and walked over to hear the details. "FBI and state police showed up at her house this morning with a real warrant," Tom continued. charged her with civil rights violations, document forgery, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights. She is looking at federal prison time. The arrest was the culmination of a month-long investigation that had expanded far beyond my original complaint. Federal agents had interviewed dozens of victims, analyzed the fake warrant, and uncovered a pattern of corruption that stretched back 3 years. Karen's attempt to destroy the fabricated warrant after the town hall meeting had been recorded by security cameras at the sheriff's department. Her efforts to intimidate witnesses had been documented through phone records and testimony. Every move she made to cover up her crimes had only provided more evidence against her. The formal charges were extensive. Civil rights violations under federal law carried potential sentences of 10 years in prison. Document forgery was a felony with mandatory minimum sentencing. Conspiracy charges could add additional years to her sentence. But the criminal prosecution was only part of the justice. The city council voted unanimously to terminate Karen's employment and revoke her law enforcement certification. She would never work as a police officer again anywhere in the United States. A federal consent decree required Cedar Ridge to implement civilian oversight of police operations, mandatory body cameras for all officers, and annual civil rights training. The changes would prevent future sheriffs from operating with the unchecked power that Karen had abused.